Hello, BookTube. This is Poetry Thursday. Every Thursday is Poetry Thursday when we try to raise the profile of poetry here on BookTube by reading a poem and giving some thoughts about it. Don't need to do any kind of critical research or give the definitive breakdown of what it means and all of its subtext. Just have to say what you think about it. I love it. I assiduously watch the channels that do Poetry Thursday, if only for the chance of maybe learning about some new poems or new poets. And I want to keep doing it myself. So I've returned once again to what is probably, no offense intended to the Oxford Book of English Verse, probably my favorite poetry anthology of all, world poetry, which is, the general editor is Clifton Fadiman, but this is Catherine Washburn and John Major, who are the editors here. You can see I've gone through this quite a bit. This is poetry from all over the world, from all over different time periods, lots and lots of new territory here. And I want to read old territory for today. I want to go back to a poet who's better known as a novelist. Robert Graves wrote I, Claudius. And when you write, I, Claudius, or Clockwork Orange, or 1984, you are forever going to be remembered, not only for that book, but for that genre. But I think, heretical opinion here, since I've read everything the man has ever written, I think Robert Graves is a better poet than he is a novelist. Or whatever the Greek myths or the White Goddess are. I don't know what they are. They're not mythography, but they're not explicitly fiction either. So I don't know what they are. I have questions about the genre selections of a lot of what he wrote, but I like his poetry just across the board. King Jesus has huge stretches of boredom in it. Count Belisarius has huge stretches of boredom in it. Hercules, My Shipmate, a terrific idea, but there are large passages in it where you know that you're following its nutcase author down some crackpot blind alley of speculation about mytho-history, instead of being the story that he could have told. The same thing happens in I, Claudius and Claudius the God, but it's all couched in Roman history, so you don't miss it. You don't notice it quite so much. Whereas the poetry is delightful. A nice, big, thick, complete poems of Robert Graves is something I don't think I've ever seen. If that volume exists, it might be UK only. But I would grab it in a heartbeat if there were such a thing. But today, I want to read a poem called The Cool Web by Robert Graves, the author of I, Claudius. Children are dumb to say how hot the day is. I want to stress again for this first line. I'll start again. The dumb in this first line means mute, means unable to speak. Doesn't mean stupid. Okay? I don't want that. I don't want you to be mentally correcting for that right out of the gate, because you've got a poem to listen to. So as long as you know, it means that definition of dumb instead of the normal the customary definition of dumb now is stupid, but it also means mute, and that's the definition he's using. Children are dumb to say how hot the day is, how hot the scent is of the summer rose, how dreadful the black wastes of the evening sky, how dreadful the tall soldiers drumming by. But we have speech to chill the angry day, and speech to dull the rose's cruel scent. We spell away the overhanging night. We spell away the soldiers and the fright. There's a cool web of language winds us in, retreat from too much joy or too much fear. We grow sea green at last and coldly die in brininess and volubility. But if we let our tongues lose self-possession, throwing off language and its watery clasp before our death, instead of when death comes, facing the wide glare of the children's day, facing the rose, the dark sky, and the drums, we shall go mad and no doubt die that way. That is Robert Graves doing a very fashionable thing for professional writers to do, which is to cast doubt and skepticism on the whole idea of writing. He's saying, if we would merely face the day without the cool web of language intervening and moderating our responses to everything because we get to live these things through language instead of directly, if we did that, we'd go crazy. But we'd die that way. In other words, we'd never go back. We'd never take on language again. We'd keep it the way it is. There's a kind of a romantic elevation of that kind of an experience of the world, a direct, non-language, non-intermediated experience of the world that you find in a lot of poetry. And I love the poem. I think it's great. But there's a bit of a note of fraud in it. that I can't help but notice, because unlike all of the Oxford and Eton educated poets who wrote poems saying it wouldn't be great if we could just dispense with language, I've lived in that world, and they never have. Never. Robert Graves never lived in a world without the cool web of language laying over it. Never. So how does he know? How does he know that there's anything longing or different? How does he know what that non-language world is like? He doesn't. He's just imagining, oh, isn't it a weary burden to have all these words? Wouldn't it be fresher and clearer to go without them, even if the direct experience of the world drove us mad? Dogs don't have words. I grew up in a world where I could shift like a light switch going on and off between a world of words, a world entirely composed of that cool web, and a world without them. A world lived far more directly, far closer to the direct world that's in this poem. And I can still step into that world at will. And I'm therefore pretty much the only one of the poets I've read who can say that. And I'm here to tell you, there's nothing wrong with the cool web of language. Nothing at all. And also, it's not the protection from the unmediated, madness-inducing realities of the world that Graves implies that it is in this poem. It is not a mediation between you and those things. Those things are going to find you, whether you know words or not, whether you retreat into volubility or not. They're still going to find you. They found Graves, and they'll find you. So this whole, wouldn't it be great? I'm going to write a long poem in words, studied words, about how great it would be to dispense with words. that poet's gimmick gets a little tiresome for me. Lots of poets' gimmicks do. I grant them their territory because often the poems are so enjoyable to me. I've gone back to Graves' poems so many times. So I thought I would do the cool web for today. The cool web of language that lays over everything and blunts its passion, softens its impact, tempers its reality. Do you ever feel that way? Do you ever feel sympathy with the poet, with the narrator in this poem by Robert Graves? And also, in the comments, feel free to sound off on whether or not you even knew that Robert Graves wrote poetry. You ought to try some of it. If you're only familiar with him as the writer of I, Claudius, you ought to try some of his poetry. It's actually quite good. A lot better than the doggerel poems that he uses in I, Claudius. But anyway, that's Poetry Thursday for today. I'm going to watch out. I've seen a few other videos so far today. Hannah at Hannah's Books did a wonderful one from a poet that I don't typically like, but as a perfect example of why I value Poetry Thursday. In her reading and talking about the poem, I wanted to give it another try. I was looking at my anthologies to see if I had that poet. Also, in what has to be the most delightful twist for Poetry Thursday recently, Aaron Facer did a Poetry Thursday in which he reads a poem of his own that was published in, I think, the Welsh Literary Review. I'll leave a link to both of those, but I'll be watching for others. I think we should work hard to make this an established thing. And I'll be back next Thursday with another poem. Thank you, BookTube.